My frame is an 88. You'll notice I have a sway bar integrated into it. Not everybody's frame looks like this. The other cars actually have bushings on the top. 88 actually bolts straight to it. You can actually buy a steel bushing kit that eliminates those. Those are actually not good for the older cars. Keep in mind, if you do take this stuff apart, all of these suspension components are supposed to be bolted on in a certain order to a certain torque. Some up with the car on the ground and some not. I don't have those specific numbers, but there are Fiero guys making videos that do. You have to buy the service manual to find those. One thing that sucks most about 88s is their e-brake. And these rear calipers actually are not really manufactured. You might be able to find a remanufactured one, but the front calipers are pretty common, and you can actually put the front calipers on the rear. Keep the sides the same, so if you have a left front caliper, put it on the rear left side, and same with the right sides. Unfortunately, I've actually stripped both of these calipers in the past, and when I strip them, I can't screw the brake hose in. Braided brake hose, always recommend that upgrade. And famously, last not forgotten also includes this, how to build axles. That axle there is actually a stock Fiero axle. And this axle here I built out of 3 axles, a manual Fiero axle and 2 GTP axles. See Last Not Forgotten's video to make those. But when it comes to an axle, you want the right length of the shaft, and you want the right ends on both sides. This one goes to the transmission, this goes to the Fiero hub. Now, one thing that I had an issue with was the boots. The first time I built this, the boots would fly off. I need to get the correct kind of boot clamp. I would not recommend using a hose clamp on these. They just don't like to stay on, especially at high RPM when you're whipping them around like crazy. They'll just slide off like nothing. So if you can see here, I took my torsion bars out. That was scary as heck. I used a ratchet strap though, and I put a towel over everything so that if something did fly off, it wouldn't hit me, it'd hit the towel and break the momentum. Instead, I'm gonna put Rodney Dickman's rear shock kits on and get rid of those nasty torsion bars. Frees up a little space in the engine compartment too, and now I know that there's not a ton of dangerous stored energy in my rear shocks. In case you're curious what all this stuff is, that thick hose there is the brake booster. The skinny cable there is the throttle cable coming out. That hose right there is the heater hose. Those are actually my 2 fuel lines coming out. The thicker one is always going to be the supply, and the thinner is the return. That there is actually that's the heater hose return. That goes from inside the car up into the engine. It actually merges on this car with the coolant return. Now when you cut your trunk out, if you do, be very careful because there is a wire harness right behind it, and I cut a little bit into that harness and I had to do a little bit of splicing to fix it. This is the vacuum cruise control, and there is not a lot of information on this unfortunately, but there is a port on here. Yes. There's a port right there, I believe, and that port is used for the vacuum line, and that will go to the supercharger. Again, my intake's actually going in through this here. I have a vent on the side. That was a IMSA style quarter panel. Now, when you got the stock Fiero, there was a ton of vacuum lines and stuff back here. You can actually remove every single one. All the vacuum system stuff is integrated into the new engine already. Also over here, you see those 2 holes in these 2 pipes. Those are the the AC refrigerant hoses. They go up to the AC dryer in the front, and that hose is the coolant supply hose, and that is where I fill from actually. I put a radiator cap on it myself. This harness here, you have no need to touch at all. I'm not sure what all it does, but I do know that the rear lights are included in that harness, and maybe the fuel pump or something comes out of it too. Don't touch that. You don't need to do anything with it. Those 2 big hoses right there, one is a fuel filling hose, and another is a fuel venting hose. So on an 88, you can't really see it at all, maybe through a little crack or something. But part of the evap system included a tank, and actually you can see it. It's that gray bit through that hole there cut in the frame. That tank is an additional gas tank, part of the evap system. I'm not sure what its real purpose was for, other than there is some laws passed in the 80s around that time that required certain evap setup. That tank's completely worthless. You can just take it completely out of the system, especially if you don't run evap on your new setup. I believe it was called an overfill tank, but there's no way that's ever overfilling. I believe that tank is actually possibly even higher than the fill lines over here. So there's no way that that tank actually does anything. So in the frame there is the engine mount nuts, and there's two things called a witch's hat nut, and they are horrible. I had to actually cut into my engine frame there just to get my engine mounts out, because the witch's hat nuts are almost impossible to pull out. I actually had to take 2 pairs of vice grips attached to it, and I had a breaker bar that was 2 feet long, and I had to use my legs to just break those stupid things loose. The entire amount of thread length there was, which was probably 1.5 inches on that witch's hat nut. So I think your best bet is just cutting it out and building your own mounts. I built engine mounts. I just welded a nut to them and put bolts through them. And I welded a nut to a long piece of steel that I could wedge into there. I welded that piece of steel to the frame. But even if it breaks loose from rust and whatever next time, since the piece of steel I welded the nut to is longer, Rodney Dickman sells these actually, it will not move. It's longer than the frame is right, so it won't move. So you're going to be able to get your engine mounts out still. And then I actually welded the frame back up after that. The trunk latch, some people do, and they probably screw their cars up. You can hoist the car. Actually, I just jack the car up on these jack stands, and be very careful where you put those. These jack stands are on a very solid piece of frame right there. However, you can poke them right through the floor if you're not careful with your car. Hoist it as high up as you possibly freaking can, high enough so that you can actually get these strut towers out from under your car. And once that's hoisted, put an engine hoist on the top to lower the engine down, and then a jack underneath it, and get some kind of dolly cart you see under there to slide the engine out with. There's a brake proportioning valve too. That needs to stay there even if you change brake lines and stuff. You need the right proportions going to the right wheels. Now when I actually let this Fiero sit outside for too long, these things exploded on me when I tried braking the first time after not driving it for a year or two. So I had to replace all the lines. I replaced them with some copper nickel. I have all of the fitting sizes for brake lines in my build thread if you're interested in how to change those out. The other 2 cradle mounts are right there and on the other side as well. And this harness you see here with the wires coming out there, that is actually the fuel pump harness. You will actually have to remove the brake lines because they attach to the brakes on the engine cradle when you do the swap. Another thing worth mentioning is the fuel pump. Now see way down there, that's the wire in the middle that comes from the fuel tank. There's 3 hoses going to the fuel tank. There's the evap, there's the vent, actually it might be 4. Evap, vent, fill, supply, and return. So there's my fuel tank in there, all the hoses going to it. To be honest, I would cut this section out. It's a pain in the butt. I'm talking about this section right here. All it does is kind of hide away the hoses for the fuel. I'd almost cut that out if I were you. It's such a pain in the butt to get those hoses off in that little tight space. Let's talk about fuel pumps for a second though. If you're gonna run a stock 3800, you're probably gonna want around and you gotta drop the tank to take this out. You're gonna want a 255 liter per hour. And if you get any more mods, you might want to go up from there. You can buy this and also the blog or forum post that I have. Now this is covered in Lost Not Forgotten's videos, but I did get the Rodney Dickman engine mounts. My engine mounts were a disaster. Do not use the stock ones. I don't recommend that at all. While I'm at it, I also changed these struts as well. Also, there's a somewhat of an intake slash water separator in here. On the original car, I tore that out. Totally worthless, useless, probably doesn't do much or restricts so much air. Now in the Fiero itself, when you first get it, you're gonna have an evap can sitting right there. Actually no, evap can's like right here. And then right there is the air filter, air cleaner. I ripped all that stuff out, simplified it magnificently, and now there's very clean, nothing there at all. Cable, that actually, it's kind of woven into the engine frame before you take it out.